Let us begin tonight's gentle journey into a sweeping tale that spans continents, centuries, and faiths, a story both turbulent and deeply human. As you settle into rest, we will drift together into the medieval world of the Crusades. These were not merely wars, they were quests born of devotion, ambition, misunderstanding, and hope. And though they are often remembered as clashing swords and besieged cities, they were also times of cross-cultural contact, of distant journeys, of merchants and pilgrims, of kings and carpenters. So, let us dim the lamps of modern distraction. Breathe deeply. The world quiets around you, and in its hush, we open a door to the past. Step through with me. We begin not with battles, but with the rhythms of daily life in the 11th century. Europe, the Levant, and North Africa each stir with their own sacred traditions, their own kings and caliphs, farmers and artisans. The Latin West, what we now call medieval Europe, is a patchwork of feudal realms lords and vassals, castles and cathedrals rising slowly in stone. The Byzantine Empire, still proudly Roman in its eastern form, centers in Constantinople, a glittering city of mosaics, domes, and processions. To the south and east lies the Islamic world, whose scholars preserve and expand ancient knowledge, whose cities like Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad hum with trade, architecture, and poetry. But tension simmers beneath the surface. In the Christian West, the papacy begins to assert a new spiritual authority. Pilgrimages to the Holy Land grow more frequent, and accounts of hardship or danger stir imaginations back home. In the Islamic world, political fragmentation weakens once unified dynasties. Meanwhile, in Byzantium, emperors watch anxiously as Turkish forces push westward. The stage is set, and yet, nothing is inevitable. History does not gallop toward destiny, it wanders, shaped by human hands and hearts. Into this mosaic steps Pope Urban II in the year 1095. In the town of Clermont, he preaches to nobles and knights, calling them to a sacred duty, to liberate Jerusalem, the city of Christ, from Muslim rule. His words are fiery, yes, but also deeply persuasive. He frames the mission as both a penance and a privilege, a crusade. The word crusade comes from the Latin crux, meaning cross. Those who take the cross sew its emblem onto their tunics. It is a spiritual journey as much as a physical one, though. In time, it becomes entwined with politics, greed, and conquest. But this tale is not only of warriors. It is of families left behind, of travelers seeing new lands for the first time, of clergy who try to steer turbulent tides, and of Muslim scholars and leaders who respond with strength and strategy. It is a tale of knights and sultans, of merchants and monks, of betrayal and belief, and always, behind it all, the city of Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, beckons across the centuries. As we journey through this story, we will follow a clear path. Each chapter will take us further along this winding road. From the origins of the crusading idea, to the First Crusade and the shocking capture of Jerusalem, to the rise and fall of crusader kingdoms in the Levant, to the legendary figures of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, to later crusades, some spiritual, some cynical, many tragic, and finally, to the legacy they left in memory, myth, and modern borders. Throughout, we will pause to observe the world as it was lived, what people ate, how they prayed, how they traveled, and what they feared. We'll listen to the clatter of hooves on dusty roads, the call to prayer echoing across minarets, and the quiet whispers of monks in candlelit scriptoriums. So let your mind ease into this landscape. With each breath, the world of the present fades gently into the background. We are not here to judge or to stir debate. We are here to witness, to understand, and to learn. This is history not as a list of dates, but as a stream of lives, an unfolding story across faiths and frontiers. And as we drift through the centuries, we may find that the Crusades, for all their drama, also reveal the timeless complexities of the human condition: belief and doubt, unity and division, courage and cruelty, peace and conflict. They are a mirror in which the past reflects back the enduring questions of humanity. Now, close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. You are safe. You are warm. The past is opening before us, one gentle footstep at a time. Let us begin. As we drift softly into the late 11th century, the world is a patchwork of kingdoms, empires, and caliphate-seek, with its own rhythms, loyalties, and sacred spaces. Europe, still reeling from centuries of Viking invasions and internal strife, slowly awakens to a new religious and cultural confidence. Latin Christendom, as it was called, begins to see itself not merely as a scattering of realms, but as a united spiritual community under the Church. At the heart of this transformation is the papacy, especially under Pope Gregory VII and his successors, who seek to strengthen the Church's moral and political authority. In this climate of reform and ambition, Pope Urban II rises as a powerful voice. A man of deep conviction and sweeping vision, he dreams not only of a spiritually renewed Europe, but also of the Church as a force that could lead kings and nobles toward divine purpose. It is the year 1095. Far to the east, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos faces dire threats. The Seljuk Turks, nomadic warriors who have recently embraced Islam, have taken much of Anatolia, once the heartland of Byzantine power. In desperation, Alexios sends envoys westward, appealing to the Pope for military aid against the Turks. Urban sees an opportunity. Not only can he help a fellow Christian empire in peril, but he can also unite the often warring knights of Europe under one divine cause. The Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, has long stirred Christian devotion. Reports from pilgrims speak of hardship, harassment, and even violence along the routes to the sacred sites. These stories, though not always accurate, take on a life of their own. On a cold November day in Clermont, France, Pope Urban II delivers a sermon that will echo across the centuries. Before a gathered crowd of clergy and nobles, he proclaims a holy expedition to the east. He urges the faithful to take up arms in defense of their brethren and to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. He offers both a cause and a reward. Those who go on crusade will receive a remission of their sins as spiritual indulgence. This idea electrifies the audience. A war that is also a pilgrimage, a sword guided by prayer, a chance for salvation. The response is overwhelming. Across France, Germany, and Italy, men begin to take the cross. Nobles sew cloth crosses onto their cloaks, signifying their sacred vow. Entire families prepare for the journey. Some seek spiritual renewal, others hope for wealth, land, or status. The motives are as varied as the people themselves. Among the earliest groups to depart is a strange and ragged procession led by Peter the Hermit, a charismatic preacher from Amiens. He gathers a large following of common folk peasants, artisans, and a scattering of knights who set out for the Holy Land in what will later be called the People's Crusade. Ill-prepared and poorly supplied, they travel through Germany and Hungary, often causing chaos as they go. In the Rhineland, tragedy unfolds. Some of these groups, stirred by religious zealotry and misunderstanding, turn against Jewish communities along the way. Thousands are massacred in a dark prelude to the violence that will follow. These attacks, later condemned by church authorities, reveal how fragile the line is between piety and fanaticism. The People's Crusade meets its end in Anatolia, where it is crushed by Turkish forces. But the real military expedition, the First Crusade, is just beginning. This crusade is led by an array of powerful nobles, including Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, and others. Though they lack a single commander, their combined armies number tens of thousands. They cross into Byzantine territory, where Emperor Alexios cautiously welcomes them. He is wary of their intentions, but agrees to provide support if they swear loyalty and return any recovered lands to the empire. With uneasy alliances forged, the Crusaders cross the Bosporus into Asia Minor. Their campaign is brutal and slow. The terrain is harsh, supplies are scarce, and communication is difficult. Yet, they achieve key victories, most notably the Siege of Nicaea, which they recapture in cooperation with the Byzantines. They push on toward Antioch, one of the great cities of the East. The Siege of Antioch lasts months and is marked by starvation, treachery, and sheer desperation. At times, Crusaders are forced to eat horses and even leather to survive. Finally, they break through, but almost immediately, they themselves are besieged by a Muslim relief army. Miraculously, the Crusaders hold out and eventually rout their enemies. Tales of holy relics, such as the discovery of the Holy Lance, said to have pierced Christ's side, bolster morale and fuel belief in divine favor. Then, in the summer of 1099, the Crusaders reach Jerusalem. The city is heavily fortified and defended by the Fatimid Caliphate, which has recently taken it from the Seljuks. The siege lasts for weeks. On July 15th, after fierce fighting, the Crusaders breach the walls. What follows is one of the most controversial episodes in medieval history. The Crusaders, driven by exhaustion, zeal, and perhaps vengeance, unleash a massacre. Muslims and Jews are slaughtered, and the sacred sites run red. Even some Christians are caught in the chaos. Accounts vary, some exaggerated, others suppressed, but the brutality of the conquest shocks even contemporaries. Yet for the Crusaders, it is a moment of triumph. They fall to their knees and give thanks at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, believed to be the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Jerusalem is now in Christian hands. In the aftermath, the Kingdom of Jerusalem is established. Godfrey of Bouillon, refusing the title of king in the city where Christ wore a crown of thorns, styles himself advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. Other Crusader states arise: the county of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the county of Tripoli. These Latin Christian enclaves are now embedded in the heart of the Muslim world, dependent on reinforcements from Europe and uneasy truces with neighboring powers. The First Crusade is a staggering success by medieval standards. Against overwhelming odds, the Crusaders have marched thousands of miles, overcome rivalries and hardship, and seized their goal. But the cost is immense, in blood, in cruelty, in the seeds of future conflict. For now, though, a fragile kingdom has been born. Pilgrims begin to trickle into the Holy Land under armed escort. Churches are restored. Fortresses rise from the hills. And from the towers of Jerusalem, Crusader banners flutter in the dry wind, symbols of a new and uncertain chapter. As the dust settles, the Crusaders believe they have fulfilled a divine mission. But history is never still, and the lands they now claim ancient and sacred to so many will not rest quietly under foreign rule. The story, dear listener, has only just begun. As the 12th century unfolds, we drift into the fragile world of the newly established Crusader states. These are Latin Christian enclaves surrounded by a mosaic of Muslim principalities, Arab tribes, Armenian Christian communities, and Eastern Orthodox populations. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the largest and most prominent of these, stretches across a narrow strip of the Levantine coast, including the sacred city itself. Here, the European settlers, Franks, as they are often called in the East, attempt to forge a new life under a burning sun. The climate is harsher than the cool forests of France or the green hills of England. Rain is scarce, the soil is dry, and yet they adapt. In the towns and cities, life takes on a rhythm of coexistence and tension. Markets bustle with goods from east and west, silks and spices, frankincense and glass, honey and olive oil. Local Arabic is often spoken alongside Latin and French. Frankish knights build fortresses, massive stone keeps, like Crac des Chevaliers, imposing and resilient, perched atop hills to guard the roads and farmlands. But these fortresses are more than military outposts. They are also symbols, assertions of permanence in a land that remains spiritually and politically contested. The Crusaders bring with them a deeply European sense of feudalism. Lords parcel out land to their vassals, churches are built, monasteries are founded, and yet the Latin settlers are always a minority, relying on local labor and customs to keep the land fertile and the roads passable. Daily life for a Crusader settler is a strange blend of cultures. A knight may ride out in chainmail in the morning and dine on dates and lamb by night. European-style chapels stand beside Eastern-style baths. Tensions remain, but so too does a surprising level of exchange, artistic, linguistic, culinary. These years are not only a time of conflict, but also of contact. Amidst this tentative peace, however, danger always lurks beyond the horizon. The Crusader states are isolated, vulnerable, and deeply dependent on reinforcements and supplies from Europe. Their greatest threat comes from a slowly awakening Islamic world. At first, the Muslim response to the Crusaders is fragmented. The Seljuk Turks, divided into smaller sultanates, focus on their own rivalries. The Fatimids in Egypt, though Muslim, had recently fought against the Seljuks and had even briefly regained Jerusalem before the Crusaders arrived. The disunity allows the Latin Christians to hold their conquests, but this is not to last. In the mid-12th century, a new figure emerges from the shifting sands of the Islamic world. His name is Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West simply as Saladin. Born in Tikrit, modern-day Iraq, and raised in the cosmopolitan city of Damascus, Saladin is shaped by a diverse and vibrant Islamic culture. He begins his career as a military commander under his uncle, Shirkuh, in service of the Zengid dynasty. When Shirkuh dies in Egypt, Saladin unexpectedly rises to power, eventually becoming Sultan of Egypt and uniting it with Syria. Charismatic, disciplined, and devout, Saladin gradually consolidates Muslim resistance to the Crusaders under one banner. To the Franks, he is at first an unknown quantity, another regional ruler in a complex landscape. But his ambitions soon become clear. Unlike earlier Muslim leaders who focused on local power, Saladin speaks of a broader vision: a unified Muslim world and the recovery of Jerusalem. While Saladin builds alliances and reforms administration in Egypt, the Crusader states are entering a period of internal instability. The Kingdom of Jerusalem suffers from factional disputes, weak leadership, and succession crises. The death of King Baldwin IV, the so-called Leper King, in 1885, leaves the kingdom in the hands of his young nephew and a divided regency council. Tensions rise between factions loyal to Raymond of Tripoli, a cautious and experienced noble, and those who follow the rash and aggressive Guy of Lusignan, husband of Baldwin's sister, Sibylla. Into this fractured landscape, Saladin advances. But he does not strike immediately. He prepares carefully, organizing armies from across Egypt and Syria, gaining support not just through force, but through diplomacy and religious legitimacy. He is seen as a just and pious leader, committed to jihad not as blind conquest, but as a sacred duty to protect Islamic lands and restore Jerusalem to Muslim hands. In 1187, the moment arrives. Saladin launches a full-scale campaign. The Crusader army, hastily assembled under Guy of Lusignan, marches out to meet him. The two forces converge near the village of Hattin, beside the Sea of Galilee. It is July. The sun blazes overhead. Saladin, understanding the land, cuts off the Crusaders from access to water. Parched and exhausted, they are surrounded. The Battle of Hattin becomes a devastating defeat. Nearly the entire Crusader army is captured or killed. The true cross, a relic believed to be the very wood of Christ's crucifixion, is lost. Saladin shows mercy to many, but the military order of the Templarsan elite band of warrior monks suffers harsh punishment. Guy of Lusignan is captured. The road to Jerusalem lies open. Saladin does not rush. His campaign is methodical, respectful of sacred sites, and avoids unnecessary bloodshed. In contrast to the massacre of 1099, when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, Saladin enters the city peacefully in October of 1187 after a brief siege. He allows Christian inhabitants to leave or remain safely upon paying a ransom. Churches are respected. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque are cleansed and rededicated. The fall of Jerusalem sends shockwaves through Europe. For nearly a century, it had stood as the centerpiece of the Crusader dream. Now it is gone, reclaimed by the faith from which it had been taken. In response, a new crusade is called the Third Crusade, and among its leaders is none other than Richard the Lionheart, King of England. But before we meet him, let us linger a moment longer in the world of Saladin and the memory of Hatton. His victory is not only military, it is moral. He becomes a figure of admiration even among his enemies. Chroniclers in Europe speak of his chivalry, his generosity, and his intelligence. He embodies the complexity of the Crusades, a devout Muslim who shows more mercy than many Christian rulers, a warrior who seeks peace, a symbol of resistance and dignity. For a moment, the Islamic world is united, and Jerusalem rests under the crescent moon once more. The Crusader states, now reduced to coastal fortresses and fragmented leadership, cling to survival. And so we pause here, dear listener. In the fading golden light of the 12th century, between the stone walls of Acre and the gentle olive groves of Galilee, we see a world both divided and deeply intertwined. The Crusades are not only a clash, they are a contact. Cultures meet in trade, in warfare, and in the exchange of stories and strategies. Architecture evolves, medical knowledge flows across frontiers, and though the armies march under different banners, the people who live among them still eat, pray, farm, and love. Let your thoughts rest in this stillness before the next storm, for soon kings will cross the sea, flags will rise again, and the sands of time will shift once more. The year is 1187. News of the fall of Jerusalem travels with astonishing speed across Europe, carried by pilgrims, merchants, and messengers. For the Christian world, it is a shock almost inconceivable. The city at the heart of Christendom, held for nearly a century, is now in the hands of a Muslim sultan. Bells toll in mourning, churches hold processions, and once more the papacy calls Christendom to arms. Thus begins the Third Crusade, often called the Crusade of Kings. Unlike the earlier expeditions led by barons and noblemen, this crusade gathers the mightiest monarchs of Western Europe. Richard I of England, known as Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, also called Philip Augustus, and Frederick I Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. Each is powerful, proud, and burdened with ambition, and each carries the weight of his people's hopes to reclaim Jerusalem. Frederick Barbarossa, the aging yet formidable German emperor, departs first. He leads a vast army organized, disciplined, and prepared. He crosses into Byzantine territory, then into Anatolia, retracing the path of earlier crusaders. But tragedy strikes. In June of 1190, while attempting to cross a river in Cilicia, Frederick drowns. His death sends his army into disarray. Many turn back. Some continue on, leaderless and disheartened. Meanwhile, Richard and Philip set sail separately, each taking the southern route by sea. Their relationship is uneasy. Both men are fierce, brilliant, and politically astute, but rivals. Philip lands in the Holy Land in 1191, laying siege to Acre, a vital coastal city held by Saladin's forces. Richard follows soon after, having paused in Sicily and famously captured the island of Cyprus along the way. Cyprus, at the time, is ruled by a rogue Byzantine governor. Richard swiftly defeats him, seizing the island and selling it to the Knights Templar before it eventually passes to Guy of Lusignan, the deposed king of Jerusalem. This move provides the Crusaders with a strategic base close to the mainland, a rare moment of consolidation in a war of chaos. The siege of Acre becomes the first major test of the Third Crusade. Saladin attempts to relieve the city, but the Crusaders, with fresh troops and siege engines, hold firm. After a long and bloody siege, Acre falls in July 1191. Richard and Philip enter triumphantly, though tensions rise quickly between them. Philip, citing illness and political matters in France, soon returns home, leaving Richard in sole command. Richard the Lionheart is now the Crusade's star. Tall, fair-haired, and commanding, he is a warrior of immense charisma, yet he is also known for his ruthlessness and pride. His presence invigorates the Crusaders, but it also strains the delicate web of alliances among them. After Acre's fall, Richard orders the execution of thousands of Muslim prisoners hostages from the siege who were being held in negotiations. The act is shocking, though not uncommon in medieval warfare. Saladin, in turn, executes captured Christians. The cycle of violence continues. Richard now advances south along the coast, heading toward Jaffa. He refuses to attack Jerusalem directly, fearing overstretched supply lines and harsh terrain. Instead, he focuses on securing strongholds and pressuring Saladin into negotiation. The Battle of Arsuf, fought in September 1191, becomes a defining moment. Saladin attacks the Crusaders in the open. Richard, maintaining strict discipline, absorbs the blows and then counterattacks with devastating force. Saladin's army is repelled. Though not a decisive victory, it is a clear statement. Richard is a commander to be feared. Despite these successes, Jerusalem remains elusive. Twice, the Crusaders come within sight of the city, but Richard hesitates. He knows that even if he takes it, he cannot hold it. The fortifications are strong, water is scarce, and Saladin remains capable of mustering a large army. A symbolic victory would mean little without lasting control. Instead, the two great leaders begin to parley. In these negotiations, we catch glimpses of mutual respect. Though they never meet in person, their envoys speak of each man's admiration for the other's courage, chivalry, and resolve. Richard, though aggressive, respects Saladin's wisdom. Saladin, though deeply committed to jihad, sees in Richard a worthy foe. They explore potential compromises. At one point, it is even suggested that Saladin's brother might marry Richard's sister, uniting the two realms. But these are dreams. The realities of faith, politics, and honor cannot be easily undone. In September 1192, Richard and Saladin agree to the Treaty of Jaffa. Jerusalem will remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims may visit freely and safely. The coastal cities from Jaffa to Tyre will remain in Crusader hands. The war ends, not in conquest, but in compromise. Richard departs soon after. His journey home is filled with peril. Shipwrecked and forced to travel in disguise, he is captured in Austria and held for ransom, a dramatic end to a dramatic campaign. Back in the Holy Land, the Crusader states survive, but barely. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is now based in Acre, not the Holy City. The Latin presence has shrunk, but it endures, held together by garrisons, trade, and fragile truces. Saladin returns to Damascus, where he is welcomed as a hero. Yet he does not rule long. He dies in 1193, barely a year after the truce. His tomb, modest and unadorned, reflects his humility. According to legend, upon his death, only a single gold coin remained in his treasury. He had given the rest to the poor. In the West, Richard becomes a legend, a Crusader king, whose boldness and courage inspire troubadours and chroniclers for generations. But he never sees Jerusalem. He returns to a divided realm, embroiled in dynastic strife and war with France. He dies in 1199 from a wound sustained during a minor siege. And so ends the era of great kings and noble duels. The third, Crusade, for all its grandeur, fails to achieve its ultimate goal. Yet it marks a high point in the martial and romantic imagination of Christendom. The memory of Saladin and Richard lives on, not only in chronicles, but in ballads and tales passed from hearth to hearth. As we rest now in the stillness of twilight, we might reflect on this moment in time where diplomacy and valor stood briefly above conquest, where mercy and courage coexisted with cruelty and ambition, and where for a time two civilizations found an uneasy balance between war and peace. Ahead, more crusades will come, less noble, more fragmented. But here, in the wake of the Lionheart and the Sultan, we glimpse a rare symmetry, two men, each revered in their world, locked in struggle, yet bound by something deeper than enmity. Now let your breath grow steady. Imagine the red roofs of Acre fading into dusk, the call to prayer mingling with the distant sound of bells and the Mediterranean breeze carrying stories across the centuries. Sleep, dear listener, as we drift gently onward. As the 13th century dawns, the dream of Jerusalem still glimmers in the hearts of many in Europe. Pilgrims speak with awe of the holy city, now under Muslim rule. Clergy preach the virtues of new expeditions, calling kings and commoners once more to take the cross. But something has changed. The crusading spirit, once driven by devotion and unity, now moves in more tangled waters. Politics, ambition, and opportunism swirl beneath the surface. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202, begins like those before it with papal blessing and spiritual intent. Pope Innocent III, a powerful and idealistic pontiff, wishes to restore Christian control of Jerusalem. He calls for a new army of the faithful, one that will correct the failures of the past and fulfill God's will. The plan is to strike Egypt first, then move north to the Holy Land. Egypt, under Ayyubid rule, is seen as the strategic heart of the Muslim world. But raising an army is one thing, transporting it across the Mediterranean is another. The Crusaders turn to the Republic of Venice, whose fleets dominate the sea. The Venetians, under the elderly and calculating Doge Enrico Dandolo, agree to provide ships. But when the Crusaders fail to pay the full cost of their transport, the Venetians propose an alternative form of payment: military service. Specifically, they ask the Crusaders to help them capture the Christian city of Zara, a rival port on the Adriatic. The Crusaders are hesitant. Zara is Catholic. Attacking it violates the very principles of the Crusade. And yet, under pressure and with no alternatives, they agree. In 1202, they sack Zara, prompting outrage across Europe. Pope Innocent excommunicates the entire crusading force. Though he later lifts the excommunication for many, the damage is done. The crusade is already drifting from its sacred purpose. But the greatest detour lies ahead. In the Byzantine Empire, internal turmoil has shaken the throne. A young prince named Alexios Angelos, exiled and seeking to reclaim power, approaches the Crusaders with an offer. If they help him overthrow his uncle, the reigning emperor, he will reward them handsomely with money, supplies, and support for their crusade. He even promises to submit the Eastern Church to Rome, reuniting Christendom after centuries of schism. It is a tempting offer, and a fateful one. In 1203, the Crusaders sail to Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. Its golden domes and massive walls rise before them like a vision. They lay siege, and the city falls. Alexios IV takes the throne alongside his blind and aged father. But the promised riches do not materialize. The Byzantine populace resents the Latin Crusaders and soon revolts. Alexios is overthrown and murdered. The situation spirals. In 1204, the Crusaders launch a second assault, this time not to restore, but but to conquer. What follows is one of the most shocking episodes in medieval history, the sack of Constantinople. Over 3 days, Crusader forces loot the city. Churches are plundered, holy relics are stolen, mosaics are smashed, palaces are burned, nuns are assaulted. Libraries, some holding ancient texts of Greece and Rome, are destroyed. The city that had once been the beacon of Christian civilization is desecrated by fellow Christians. Even some crusaders are horrified by the violence. But the leadership driven by greed and desperation establishes a new regime. The Latin Empire of Constantinople is declared with a crusader noble crowned emperor. For over half a century, Western Europeans rule parts of the shattered Byzantine world, though they are never fully accepted by the local population. Back in Rome, Pope Innocent is both furious and resigned. The crusade meant to liberate Jerusalem has instead destroyed one of Christianity's greatest cities. He mourns the tragedy even as he attempts to salvage spiritual meaning from it. The consequences are far-reaching. The Byzantine Empire, though it will be partially restored in 1261, is permanently weakened. The breach between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism deepens, hardened by blood and betrayal. Trust between the two halves of Christendom shatters. The crusading ideal once pure, if naive now, bears a shadow. Still, crusades continue. The Fifth Crusade, launched in 1217, once again targets Egypt, seen as the key to controlling the Holy Land. Led by forces from Hungary, Austria, and eventually by King Andrew II, it achieves early success by capturing the port of Damietta at the Nile's mouth. But the Crusaders, lacking coordination and overwhelmed by flooding and disease, are forced to surrender and withdraw. The Sixth Crusade, however, unfolds in an unexpected manner. Led by the excommunicated Emperor Frederick II, it is a crusade won not by war, but by diplomacy. In 1229, Frederick negotiates directly with the Ayyubid Sultan al-Kamil, Saladin's nephew. The two men, both rational and pragmatic, reach an agreement. Jerusalem will be returned to Christian control for 10 years, along with Bethlehem and Nazareth. Muslim rights within the city are respected. It is a remarkable achievement, though controversial. Frederick, a brilliant but cynical man, crowns himself King of Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yet no great battle is fought. No army of knights rides forth. Some praise his wisdom, others scorn his methods. But for a brief moment, Jerusalem is again in Christian hands, without bloodshed. These gains, however, are short-lived. The fragile peace breaks down. Muslim forces retake Jerusalem in 1244, this time destroying its Christian fortifications. The city, sacred to so many, passes again into Muslim control, where it will remain for centuries. Subsequent crusades grow smaller, less organized, and more desperate. The Seventh and Eighth Crusades are led by King Louis IX of France, a deeply pious monarch later canonized as St. Louis. In 1248, he launches the Seventh Crusade to Egypt, capturing Damietta once more. But his army is eventually defeated, and he is taken prisoner released only after a heavy ransom is paid. Undeterred, Louis returns years later in the Eighth Crusade, this time targeting Tunis in North Africa. But illness ravages his forces. He himself dies of dysentery in 1270 on foreign soil, still dreaming of Jerusalem. And what of the Crusader states? They hold on just barely. The once mighty kingdom of Jerusalem now exists in name only. Its capital moved to Acre, the last great Latin stronghold on the coast. Surrounded and besieged, its defenders become increasingly reliant on military orders. The Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights, monastic warriors sworn to defend the faith. But the world is changing. The Mongols sweep across Asia, shaking the foundations of both Muslim and Christian realms. In the Levant, the Mamluks, former slave soldiers who rise to power in Egypt, emerge as fierce defenders of Islam. In 1291, they lay siege to Acre. This time, there is no rescue. The Crusaders are overwhelmed. The city falls, churches are burned. The remaining Latin Christians flee by sea. The last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land is lost. After nearly 2 centuries, the crusading dream, at least in its original form, is at an end. Let us pause here. The Fourth Crusade, the sack of Constantinople, the failed expeditions to Egypt, and the final loss of Acre, these mark the decline of a movement once filled with sacred fire. Yet in this slow fading, there is a kind of solemn beauty. History, like a flame, flickers not only in glory, but also in sorrow. And though the swords have long since rusted, the echoes remain, in broken walls, in sea-smoothed relics, in the legends told in the cloisters of monasteries and the bazaars of Cairo. Close your eyes now. Imagine the candlelight reflecting on Venetian water, the shadows dancing on the stone walls of Acre, the call of merchants in the alleys of Damascus. Sleep, dear listener. The final chapters await us, just beyond the veil of dreams. As the last Crusader strongholds fall along the Levantine coast, and as the Holy Land slips from Latin Christian control, the crusading movement does not disappear. Instead, it transforms its energy, redirected across new frontiers, often far from Jerusalem. Though the banner of the cross still flies, its purpose becomes more complex, more political, and often less tied to pilgrimage than to power. The crusade, once focused on the sacred geography of the Bible, now becomes a flexible idea, one that can be applied wherever the church sees danger, heresy, or opportunity. We begin this chapter in southern France. It is the early 13th century, and the region of Languedoc flourishes with a unique culture, one of troubadours, castles, and independent-minded nobles. But beneath the poetry and prosperity lies a growing spiritual movement, the Cathars. They preach a dualistic belief system, viewing the material world as inherently evil, created not by a benevolent God, but by a corrupt demiurge. They reject the authority of the Catholic Church, its sacraments, and its wealth. To the church in Rome, the Cathar movement is heresy dangerous and spreading. In 1209, Pope Innocent III calls for a crusade within Europe against fellow Christians. Thus begins the Albigensian Crusade. Northern French nobles, eager for land and papal favor, descend upon the south. What follows is not a war of conversion, but one of annihilation. The town of Béziers, for instance, becomes a grim symbol. When asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics among the citizens, a papal legate reportedly replies, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Over the next 2 decades, the once independent culture of Languedoc is crushed. The Catholic Church reasserts control. The Inquisitiona system of ecclesiastical courts to identify and punish heresy is born in this climate of fear and repression. Meanwhile, in northern and eastern Europe, the crusading banner moves into pagan lands. Along the coasts of the Baltic Sea, regions such as Prussia, Livonia, and Lithuania remain outside the Christian world. Their peoples, Baltic and Finnic tribes, follow animistic traditions, revering forests, rivers, and ancestors. To bring these lands into Christendom, the Church authorizes new crusades, this time led not by kings, but by military orders. Chief among them is the Teutonic Order, a brotherhood of warrior monks originally founded to care for pilgrims in the Holy Land. They now set their sights on the east. These northern crusades are long and grueling. Over decades, the Teutonic Knights carve out a domain along the Baltic coast, founding castles and cities such as Königsberg. They forcibly convert local populations, suppress native customs, and impose feudal rule. Resistance is fierce, especially in Lithuania, which remains defiantly pagan well into the 14th century. Eventually, Lithuania adopts Christianity, not through conquest, but through royal marriage and diplomacy. But the legacy of these crusades, endures in the cultural and religious maps of Northern Europe. And now, dear listener, we shift our gaze southward once more to the Iberian Peninsula. Here, the crusading movement takes yet another form, the Reconquista. For centuries, Christian and Muslim realms coexist in what is now Spain and Portugal. At times they war, at times they trade. Mosques and churches rise within view of one another. Scholars translate Arabic texts into Latin. Farmers till land side by side. It is a region of borders shifting and porous. But by the 11th and 12th centuries, the Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, Leon, and Portugal begin to push steadily southward. The papacy supports their campaigns, declaring them crusades and offering indulgences. Knights from across Europe travel to Iberia, drawn not only by faith, but by land, wealth, and glory. Cities such as Toledo, Córdoba, and Seville fall to Christian forces. The great victory at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 breaks the power of the Almohad Caliphate, a Muslim dynasty ruling much of southern Spain. Slowly, the Christian kingdoms reclaim territory, but here too, the crusading spirit mixes with pragmatism. In many towns, Muslim and Jewish communities are allowed to remain under Christian rule, paying special taxes and maintaining their own laws. These converso communities become a distinct and often precarious part of Iberian society. The final act of the Reconquista comes in 1492, when the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, capture Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula. The event is celebrated as a triumph of faith, but it also marks the beginning of religious uniformity enforced by decree Jews, and Muslims are soon expelled or forced to convert. Even as crusades rage in France, the Baltics, and Spain, the Holy Land is not forgotten. Small expeditions, often called crusades in name only, continue throughout the 14th century. Some are little more than raids. Others, like the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396, aim to halt the advance of a new and formidable power, the Ottoman Turks. At Nicopolis, a coalition of French, Hungarian, and other European forces is disastrously defeated by the Ottomans. The prisoners are executed or ransomed. It becomes clear that the days of grand crusades are over. And yet, the idea persists. In the 15th century, as the Ottomans press into southeastern Europe, calls for crusade are revived. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 to Mehmed II, a seismic events and shockwaves through Christendom. The great Byzantine city, once sacked by fellow Christians in 1204, is now in Muslim hands. Pope after pope calls for new crusades to retake the city. But the Europe of the Renaissance is fractured and distracted. National rivalries, religious reform movements, and the beginnings of overseas exploration all draw attention elsewhere. Indeed, by the late 15th century, the spirit of crusade takes to the sea. The Portuguese, under Prince Henry the Navigator and his successors, begin exploring the coasts of Africa. Their voyages are partly economic, seeking gold, spices, and trade, but also religious. They dream of encircling Islam, reaching Prester John, the legendary Christian king of the East, and spreading Christianity abroad. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounds the Cape of Good Hope and reaches India. Within a generation, the age of exploration begins, bringing European ships to Asia and the Americas. The crusading impulse is reborn as missionary zeal, now tied to empire. But what of the spiritual idea, the yearning that first sent knights eastward under Pope Urban's call? It lingers. Even in the 16th and 17th centuries, the concept of crusade reappears in different forms. Catholic monarchs speak of defending Christendom against Protestant heresy. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where a Christian fleet defeats the Ottoman navy, is celebrated as a crusading victory. Yet the world has changed. The Reformation, the printing press, and scientific discovery alter how faith interacts with power. By now, the medieval crusade is memory glorified in poetry, criticized by reformers, and preserved in stone and manuscript. And so, we close this chapter. From the hills of France to the plains of Prussia, from the valleys of Andalusia to the palaces of Constantinople, the Crusades stretched their influence across centuries and landscapes. They were never a single war, but a pattern of movements, sometimes holy, sometimes hollow, always shaped by the people who lived and dreamed within them. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the echoes of hooves in a quiet forest, the flicker of candlelight on monastery walls, the faint whisper of prayers in forgotten languages. The Crusades are ending, but their memory still lingers. And in our final chapter, we will gently explore that legacy, the enduring shadows and reflections of this long and solemn tale. The battles have faded. The kings and caliphs, popes and preachers have all passed into the silence of history. Yet the Crusades, despite their distance in time, remain with use etched into our architecture, our literature, our politics, and our imagination. But what truly have they left behind? We begin in the cities and landscapes once shaped by their presence. In Acre, the stones of crusader fortresses still rise from the earth weathered but proud, shaped by hands long gone. Beneath the streets, secret tunnels whisper of sieges and soldiers. In Jerusalem, the churches built by crusaders, like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, still welcome pilgrims, their darkened interiors holding centuries of candle smoke and whispered prayers. In Europe, the legacy of the Crusades takes other forms. Magnificent Gothic cathedrals, financed in part by returning crusaders or inspired by the architecture they encountered abroad, soar into the skies of France and Germany. Hospitals and orders of knighthood, originally created to serve pilgrims and protect routes to Jerusalem, evolve into enduring institutions. Yet the most lasting legacy is not in stone, but in memory, how the Crusades have been remembered, retold, and reshaped across the centuries. In medieval Europe, the Crusades were often celebrated. Chroniclers praised the bravery of knights, the righteousness of the cause, and the sacrifices made in pursuit of a holy goal. Troubadours composed songs of noble warriors and distant lands. The image of the crusader became idealized, gallant, faithful, and divinely guided. But even then, not all voices agreed. Some writers questioned the violence, the bloodshed, the contradictions of waging war in the name of peace. And some, in quiet corners of monasteries, wondered whether the true crusade lay not in distant lands, but within the human soul. In the Islamic world, the memory of the Crusades took a different shape. During the medieval period, many Muslim chroniclers viewed the crusader-scald Franks as foreign invaders, often barbaric in manner, but formidable in war. Saladin became a symbol of resistance, not only for his military success, but for his honor and chivalry. In later centuries, as European colonialism spread, the Crusades were remembered through the lens of foreign domination and cultural survival. In modern times, the memory of the Crusades has grown more complex and more contested. In Europe, the romantic vision of the Crusader knight was revived during the 19th century. Painters, poets, and historians, caught up in nationalism and nostalgia, depicted the Crusades as noble adventures or symbols of Christian unity. Castles were restored. Medieval tales were reimagined. The Crusader became a figure of legend. In the Muslim world, especially during the 20th century, the term crusade was revived in political language as a symbol of Western aggression or interference. Leaders and thinkers pointed to the Crusades as early examples of imperialism, while others used the memory to call for unity or resistance. And in the broader world among Jews, Orthodox Christians, and Eastern communities, the Crusades are often remembered with sorrow. In 1096, during the First Crusade, entire Jewish communities in the Rhineland were massacred by crusaders on their way east. These pogroms are remembered as early examples of religiously motivated violence against Jews in Europe. The Greek Orthodox Church, too, remembers the sack of Constantinople in 1204 as a profound betrayal, Christian attacking Christian, Latin against Greek, in the name of Christ. That act deepened the divide between Eastern and Western Christianity, a rift still felt in subtle ways today. And yet, the Crusades are not only about conflict, they also left behind currents of connection. Trade between East and West flourished during the Crusader centuries. European merchants encountered spices, textiles, perfumes, and scientific knowledge, much of it preserved and expanded by Muslim scholars. Arabic numerals, medical texts, and ancient Greek philosophy transmitted through the Islamic world re-entered Europe, helping spark the intellectual revival known as the Renaissance. In art and literature, images of the Orient, the East captured the imagination. Though often romanticized or misunderstood, they revealed a fascination that crossed cultural boundaries. Even the concept of holy war was challenged by experience. By the late Middle Ages, theologians and scholars began questioning whether violence could ever be truly sacred. Some began to speak of inner struggle, the spiritual crusade, as a higher calling. And so we are left with a tapestry of meanings. The Crusades were war-fierce, brutal, and fueled by faith. But they were also exchanges of ideas, technologies, and memories. They were moments of contact as well as conflict, of misunderstanding and recognition. Today, historians seek to understand, not to glorify or condemn, but to see the Crusades in their fullness, to hear the voices of knights and pilgrims, imams and merchants, widows and poets, to study the past not as a mirror, but as a window. And perhaps that is the gentlest lesson of all, that history, like memory, is not fixed. It shifts with time, with place, with perspective. The Crusades are not a single story, but a collection of stories, layered like dust on stone, echoing through time. As you now drift toward sleep, imagine the flicker of a lamp in a stone tower, a scribe bent over parchment, recording the tales of his age. Hear the quiet breath of the past distant hooves, whispered prayers, the rustle of banners in a desert wind. Let this story settle gently in your mind. The story of the Crusades of faith and fire, of sorrow and splendor has carried us across centuries, and now it rests, as you do, in peace.